he was doing the Lord's work, if you will. So to guilt him or to call him back to me was selfish.
And you were how old?
6. I mean, when that started.
I would like to add that while they had a dynamic where their moms were not in the cult, my parents were in it my whole life, both of them, and they lived together the whole time. However, I did move away from them into the pastor's house when I was 7, and I lived there for 4 years off and on. So I did have like a weird experience, and even when I did live at home with my family, Tony, the leader, had put my dad on night watches, and he was never at home with us. So even though my mom and dad were both there, they weren't necessarily a strong marital couple. I loved them, I loved them, and I didn't ever have to go to other people's houses aside from Tony's. But
Just a sex offender.
yeah.
No big deal.
So it was a little bit of a different dynamic. I always loved both of my parents and felt like we had a strong family, even though my eldest siblings were 16 and 17 years older than me. And when I came into the world, one of them had already been married and had a child of her own, and the other one shortly ran away, and I was never allowed to speak to him or express feelings of love or missing him. And as I grew up, each of my brothers, I have 3 older brothers, and each of them ran away, and it was the same thing. I couldn't say I missed them, I couldn't ask about calling them, and for one of them, we actually me and my mom held a funeral, we sang songs, and we're like, well, he's basically dead now, we're never gonna see him again. So that's how we treated it.
I'm jumping a little bit here, but you brought this up, so I think it's a good time. What were the perceptions you had, and what did you learn about members when they did leave? Either they were kicked out or they left. What did Tony say about that and teach you about that?
He constantly would just bring up terrible things about them, especially to the family members. If the family member ever acted out, he would bring up how their family that left already was evil, a bad seed, and how they're related to them, so they're predispositioned to be evil, and he would just bring that up, like, you already have this family member out there, you better watch it, because the devil's really strong presence in your family. So it was always, and they were like blasphemers and backsliders, so you weren't able to express any care for them.
There was this one point where my whole family had left the cold at a point, and I was like 12 years old, and I found out coming back from this pool party, and one of the sisters told me that my whole family was gone. I had no idea. I was like a few steps away from their door, and they gave me the choice to go with my father, and I was so terrified of backsliding on the Lord. I chose no, and I was 12 years old, and so I went to a sister's dorm for a few months. So it was very looked upon in not a good way to leave the cold.
Not only looked upon in a bad way, but we thought we would literally go to hell, of course. So.
Marcus, did you have something to say about that?
Tony just held and preached that leaving his cult was to literally choose to walk through the gates of hell, for lack of a better phrase. That's what he taught us. And he taught us that those people that left were essentially they were spiritually dead. That the odds of them coming back were slim to none. We were taught that we were to just kind of cut off those dead pieces of our family, and that was division that was taught. I mean, in our households individually. My dad used to sit me down, and probably did to my siblings too. And he would say that he could picture all of his other kids growing up and falling away, but that I was his strongest child, and that he would be honored and proud to spiritually, if you will, step over their corpses on our way to heaven. I mean, we were having conversations like that. I was 8 years old.
So how did that affect you hearing that?
Well, I mean, relative to what I knew, that was a positive thing. I mean, this cult mindset was all I knew. So for him to say that to me, it made me feel unique, it made me feel strong, it made me feel special. But I mean, in reality, it was just planting that divide so that if in the event, which one of my older siblings did end up leaving on their own accord, when that happened, my response was, I mean, it hurt. I mean, it hurts as much as as I think it should have, but it was already, I already had those thoughts organized. I was, I was heartbroken, but I wasn't going to be like her. And essentially, she was dead. She was dead to me. I mean, it wasn't a hatred. It was a loss. She wasn't dead to me like I don't like you. She was dead to me like she literally died like in a car accident. It was a loss.
What did you learn about relationships watching your parents?
Well, my parents, my father and mother fought a lot, and my father was very abusive to my mother, and I remember it became such a normal thing for them to be screaming at each other and for my mother to be crying that we would become like really nervous, and it would become a normal thing, but it was very uncomfortable. And so and then the fathers were very they really like subdued the woman, so it showed that the male was like the head of the house and the woman didn't have much to say. And it's a broken family, so that's what I learned from relationships. That just not a good example overall for me.
I would like to say that although men were the head of the house and all of that, my dad grew up in a non-religious family, loving a good home and all of that, and so he wasn't into subduing women. He just wanted a happy life, and he was very gentle, and so he was like picked on because he was not the kind of man that wanted to discipline the children. My mom would say, "You have to spank these kids," and he was like, "I do? Why do I have to spank them?" And she would be the one that ended up spanking us most of the time, and some of them, they weren't like spankings. I mean, I don't know if they were spankings or beatings, but my mom actually at times like asked for her children to be beaten by like the man that was like known for beating the children with the big board and all of that, because she just wanted to, I guess, make up for my dad not being the strong male, and she wanted to prove that like her family disciplined their children. So she had like, I don't know, it was weird. The relationship there was that my dad wasn't man enough, I guess, and so she had to like compensate for it, and she was always constantly just trying to prove that we were disciplined enough and that we were enough to please God.
And what was the Tony's attitude and the attitude of the other people in the cult towards your dad, because of how he was?
Well, I found out at some point that like he told my mom not to have intimacy with him for a while, so she withheld that. He told people that he was like a Mickey Mouse kind of guy, wishy-washy. And my dad loved to take us to the library when we were kids, and that was found out, and Tony got scared that we were getting information at the library, and so he actually got it banned for the whole church. We couldn't go, and so my dad was like the guy that banned the library, got that banned because he was a person that liked to read stories to his children, and so it was always a negative light, of course.
How did you feel about him?
In my heart, I always like loved him and protected him, and even though Tony said this stuff, like I didn't think he's lying or he's wrong, but in my heart I felt like a divide, and I didn't know how to voice it, and I wouldn't tell anyone, but I never let him poison me against him.
Can you tell us about the beatings and the board, and kind of, I think all of us have a different picture in our minds about what that means. Can you describe what those boards were like and what the public meetings would be like?
Well, there was one point where Vanessa's sister, she had gotten in trouble, and the man that used to administer the beatings was very tall, very terrifying, and I remember they were going to take her to this other room, and she was like fighting and struggling, and he came rushing through the door, and he's like saying, "Do you want to come with me? Do you want to come with me?" And he dragged her out by her feet while she was screaming, and I was there with Vanessa, and they shut the door, and all we could hear was her screams, but they told us later, or she told us later what had happened and what had taken place. It was very, what's the word? A terrifying, a very like, I guess like animal, not even like considered a human, because she was just like dragged out by her feet, you know.
Over by my house.
Yeah, and then like at one point, our brothers had gotten beat in Arkansas. And I remember us hearing that they had gotten beat, and we were all crying because we heard why they had gotten beat for, and it was like stupid stuff like, you know, boys being boys, like spraying each other with spray bottles and stuff like that. And we all went down to the nursery and we were crying, and one of the sisters reported us to the pastor, and he all called us to his house, and we thought that we were going to get beat too. But it was something very, it was like on a whole nother level. I mean, Angela can speak for her brother. Her and another boy got beat so bad that they couldn't show up to church for a couple of weeks, was it? Because their faces were so distorted.
Well, my brother played keyboard for the services, and his hands were too mutilated at the time that he couldn't even play. So he wasn't allowed to go to church lest people asked questions of why he wasn't playing. But the board itself, we had a carpenter in the church that was ordered to make it, and it was about this long, you know, this wide, this thick, and I didn't realize that there were holes drilled in it to make the air swing through faster. The boys seemed to get it a little bit harder, maybe not every time, but the time when I was made to watch my brother and the other boy get beaten, they were getting punches to the face and slapped, and they were literally bleeding and bloody. I just got like my hair pulled and dragged and stuff like that, so I wasn't like getting blood drawn. And he actually told him to go a little bit easier on me because I'm a girl and I needed to reproduce so that I can make more members for the cult. So it was very, it was like he was aware that women's reproductive systems were important to him. As far as the actual stance of the beating, when I was 12, and first of all, I had to watch the boys get beaten, and that was so terrifying, and knowing that I was going to be next, and that some of my friends were watching, and some of the adults, and my parents were watching, and like being angry because my mom had requested this for me, and all I did was make a smart aleck remark in school to like show my friends that I wasn't afraid to like stand up to my mom, who was a big reporter. But like he made us stand with our legs apart, and he made me hold on to my ankles while my legs were apart, and then he hit me as hard as he could, and I flew forward, and when I flew forward, he growled at me that he told me to stay there, and he yanked me by the hair and made me stand back up, and every time I fell forward and he kept yelling, "I told you to stay there," and I'm like, how do I stay there with full force and I'm on my ankles? So it was just ridiculous and, you know, humiliating. And I do remember when the boys were getting beaten, they weren't crying, and Tony was saying, "Oh, it must not be hard enough. They're trying to be strong and impress the girls." And so then they started screaming and crying to show that, you know, it's enough. Afterwards, after I ran to the back of the house and to cry in peace and be alone, and I found the man who beat us. I found his daughter, who was our age, and she was weeping in the corner, and I was like, "Are you okay?" And she was like, "Are you okay?" She knew what her dad's beatings were like, and she was so horrified that her friends had to get beaten by him that she was just weeping about it.
Yeah, I was going to say that I also lived in Tony Alomo's house as well for about 2 years, right when he was taken. And Ashley was, he taught like families should report each other all the time. Like it was terrible. And me and both my sisters were living in his house as well at this time. And I had went and told my brother, we were talking after one of the services one night, and I had told him that Tony had called him like a punk or like a name that Tony had called him, and my sisters overheard me calling him that and went and reported me, and Tony had me beat for it and had like all of his wives come in and watch in his room, and had 2 of my sisters hold like, somebody hold one foot, somebody hold the other foot, somebody hold one arm and the other arm, and had me sprawled out and pulled out his board, which was as big as like a full black trash bag with drilled holes in it. And luckily I only got beat 4 times with the board, but he had everyone watch to humiliate me. And I couldn't like sit or like it hurt to pee or anything. I had bruises like all down my thighs for 2 weeks straight, just like purple and blue. And after that, he made me like beg, like pretty much praise him and like apologize and just like tell him he's the prophet of God, and like he loved like seeing me cry, and like he was just like making me beg for like forgiveness for that. And yeah, that was one of the times that I got beat.
Let me just get this really clear so we get it. Parents, siblings, friends reported each other, knowing that beatings and punishments would occur. Were there, and you could be reported just for playing with like spray bottles like water guns. Were there rules that did make sense?
The only rule that there was one like universal rule: if they're older than you, they're right. And I hate to cite a specific example of abuse because I think that fails to give scope to a lifetime of abuse. I can tell you that I've bled through my pores, not from a cut, but from the brutality of being stricken so many times. I can tell you that mahogany hurts more than pine. I know that because they knew that. They studied. I don't know. I can't speak for them, but it seemed like they enjoyed it. I've heard former cult members that chose to join those cults talk about how they're victims, and for me that's hard because the people that chose to join the cult that I grew up in, the adults that went there of their own accord, the things that they did to me, things that they did to us, were not like strictly a projection of the leader's will. They had he set the narrative, but a lot of them were into it. A lot of, and for them to come out and say, "Oh, I was manipulated." Like the skills of a car salesman sort of fade at some point, and at some point you're responsible for what you did. But I don't think a single example is good enough. And the rules, there weren't rules specifically. It wasn't. When the sun came up, it was different. As long as the person that was bigger than you wasn't angry at you, you were okay. It was a little more animal. You know, it wasn't. They didn't communicate with words. They didn't say, "Hey, this is what I want you to do." They often would snarl at you. Because they didn't have to communicate. They weren't required to do that. If you made someone angry, even if you didn't make them angry yourself, if they were angry, it was not uncommon for them to grab you by your throat and just beat you until they were tired. You know, like that was just a Tuesday.
And I do want to say that while the beatings were so severe that they weren't speaking about to get the pain. Some of the other punishments were, fastings, which were forced starvations with only water to drink, and kids as young as 8 years old did that. Women that were pregnant had to do that. And multiple days. I never did 7 days, but I knew kids that were a little bit older than me that did 7 days. The longest I did was 3 days, and you still had to work. You weren't allowed to rest or feel bad. Like you had to do your regular thing. So some other things were separation from your friends. Like she wasn't allowed to talk to her if they were best friends and they got in trouble together, and you were separated from your family, or if you lived in this place, you were moved to this place, or the men were sent on diesel therapy where they'd go for months and months with one of the single brothers on a truck doing business because no one could ride anywhere alone. So if a young man displeased him, he would just be gone, isolated, missing out on their education during that time. He cycled through the different punishments depending on how he felt and what fancied him at the moment.
How did you feel about your parents? Did they have the authority over you, or did Tony?
Sometimes, if they felt like it was out of their depth, they would reach out to Tony. I feel like it was, my dad would go through phases of like different fervor where he was like really trying to please Tony, and other times when he was kind of more relaxed, and in those times he wasn't as strict with us, whereas other times when I feel like he was trying to really make good or he was feeling bad about something, he would rely more on Tony. Tony could overrule any punishment or leniency that our dad would give us.
So Tony was truly wielding authority over the other adults as well. I'm not excusing the adults, I'm just sort of getting a picture of it. Okay. Did you feel like you could go to any adult when you were sad or needed help or had some questions?
It was a minefield. That's all I'll say about that.
Yeah.
Maybe you could, but maybe it would be terrible.
Especially as we started to get towards like 10 and up, other women started to see us as like threats because we were also adults too. We were at marriage age and things like that, so we weren't treated like children anymore. We were adults, so everybody was doing the best they could to like cover themselves, and if they could throw you under the bus to save themselves, they would do it in a heartbeat.
Can you tell this group who lived in Tony's house?
Young girls.
Yeah, all 4 of us. 2 of my sisters at one point. Oh God, like
No boys, basically. No boys, because he wasn't
absolutely no
homosexual.
boys. Yeah.
He had 13 wives at one point.
Yeah.
Oh, well, what we didn't realize is at the time he had moved a bunch of us, like probably 20 of us at once in his house, and he was like slowly weeding us out because he was starting to groom another crop of wives.
When adults were kicked out, how did that affect you? I mean, kind of emotionally. What did you? We know that you were farmed out to places to live, and kind of the day-to-day life would be different in terms of how you were treated. But how did you feel? What did you feel about that?
Well, my mom was kicked out. I was actually living with Tony, so I wasn't living with my mom, but she was kicked out. A few months before, I was actually taken by the FBI. And when I found out she had been kicked out, which means she was pretty much dead to me, I wouldn't see her again. He stood there and called me and my sisters in and just put her down in every single way, like degraded her, degraded us a little bit, degraded her more. Then went on to my dad, which was living in another part of the cult. So, I wasn't around him as well. And then degraded him, then degraded my grandpa who was living in the cult. It was just, like, it was terrible. And, it made me feel, I thought my mom was like, I would never, ever see her again. I was 12 years old. And we couldn't really cry, because we're standing right there in front of him. And weakness was terrible. We were bashed for, ever crying. So I remember leaving as soon as he was done after an hour and a half of just going off on my whole family. Me and my sisters going into another room and just kind of crying, you know, just like feeling emotions like, oh my God, this just happened. And luckily there was some of the wives that were living in his house came in and comforted us, and, you know, kind of were like a little bit of a motherly figure. But it was devastating. And then my brother, he was 17, I believe, he was 16 or 17. He ran away from the cult as well. And then a few months after that, my older sister ran away. So it was just like me and my little sister stuck living in this cult leader's house until we were taken.
I was saying, my parents were, my mother was in and out of the church more often than not. And then my father was gone a lot, and at one point he did get kicked out, and it was only me there. And I kind of like went through what Shane was talking about, how Tony would talk really bad about your mother. And he was actually talking to her in front of me at one point, and he told her that he could see the devil in her eyes. And I'm like 11 years old, you know, like listening to this, and I'm like, you know, I was very embarrassed of my mother because she was just that figure that she got reported a lot, and then like Tony would say all this stuff about her. You know, it was difficult for a child looking up to your parents and that being reflected back to you about them.
Was there ever a time that your parents could act like parents?
I feel like the last time I remember I was so young was probably 6. It was like the older we got, I mean, honestly, once you got to about 10, you were an adult.
It's like 8, 9, 10, yeah. It's like you were looked at as
A worker. I mean, I started working when we were 6 and 7.
yeah.
You were working.
Tell us about that. What was your value as a child to the cult?
As women, well, everyone was workers, you know, but then as women, we were told for years and years that once you hit puberty, you're ready to start having babies and be married.
Tony would brag to us how he could just gift us.
And he would tell us, we would all be in the room, you know, and he would pull us in there for some minor infraction we did, like not drying the dishes enough and leaving water spots on them. And he would say that women are pigs, and he would say, oink, oink, you're good for nothing but eating, sleeping, going to the bathroom, having sex, having kids. And then he would say, none of you could be models. None of you are beautiful. And we never thought we were.
Yeah, we were all
I didn't even know what a model was.
We were like, okay, like we weren't thinking we were anything, like, good. So we were taught very early on that we did not have very much worth whatsoever.
We were also pulled out of school. I think we were in the 7th grade. After that, we didn't need anything. And what we did learn was heavily, they took heavily monitored, yeah.
I always cared about school, and I did my last 2 years of school in 1 year because I didn't really have a teacher anymore, because the teachers needed to help the kids that needed more help. And so I just like wrote my lesson plan to do like 2 a day. And but he did take out at 6th grade, there was no science and there was no algebra, because, you know, that's unnecessary and impractical. And what was practical was heavy editing skills, so we could edit the gospel literature. And what else was good? Like, I remember memorizing maps, but yeah, I don't know, just
Marcus, what kind of work did you do, Marcus?
When I was younger, when I was like 6 and 7, I don't think I got as much responsibility thrown onto me as maybe they did, because my dad was a more productive member of the cult. So I was at a really young age, I was able to kind of hide in his shadow. But Tony was a jealous person, and so the more well-liked my dad became, the more he sent my dad paid, just to do whatever, refurbishing houses, or I don't know, I don't even know half the time. But it was when Greg was, my dad's name is Greg, I just don't like calling him Dad. When Greg was sent away as I was turning like 8, 9, and 10, which was happening more frequently, that's when I started to take over more responsibility. It was a lot of warehouse stuff. Angela earlier referenced diesel therapy. So Tony Alomo, like his cult owned like several businesses, and he would get, well, businesses and charities. He would get goods donated to a charity, and then one of his businesses, i.e. us, would repackage those donated goods, and then that business would sell the goods to someone across the country, and then his trucking company would transport it, and he would pocket the money from the trucking company and from the goods sold as well. He was a racket. He took all the money. So it was a lot of whatever the needs were of those businesses, of those, whatever those distribution centers needed, whether it was sorting, packing, stacking, it was warehouse work.
What were the conditions for
Hot.
kids?
Dirty.
Yeah, it was a sweatshop. I mean, it was a sweatshop and we were young. We were
Was
really
it
young.
dangerous in any
Very
way?
dangerous.
For an 8-year-old.
No, well, I mean the conditions and the impact.
They weren't making sure that we ate. We were handling like box cutters and like we would like take old dates off of cans, like my fingers blistered over from the acetone because they didn't give me any gloves. We were told to like climb up on all these pallets to like get stuff that the adults didn't want to risk their neck to go get, things like
And
that.
lifting boxes, like 50-pound boxes, like sometimes by ourselves. I don't know how we did it. And then, of course, like together and working with hot glue guns. I actually started working in warehouses at a very young age because my grandfather, Tommy Scarcella, was like Tony's right-hand man who owned a lot of the warehouses throughout the cults and different, like in New York and different places that the cult was from. So my mom started working for my grandpa and worked in the office dealing with paperwork and stuff. So we went and traveled all throughout the warehouses, and I mean, all of us girls, I remember all of you girls, yeah, Paris, like different warehousing sites. And it was just all manual labor, like hot glue guns. I remember having like a 2nd-degree burn at like 6 years old, and getting like a huge burn and going to the doctor, and the doctor somehow had a tray system with my grandpa, and we traded him instead of paying like him, you know, like a normal doctor visit. I guess I didn't have insurance. Traded him some stuff from the warehouse to like pay for my doctor bill.
And I do want to say, most of the time, there was no doctors. That was very rare. so-
I didn't have a birth certificate, so I couldn't go to the doctor.
Most of the kids didn't have birth certificates. And it was, most of the time, if you were sick, you had to just pray, and if you didn't get better, then you weren't believing enough.
So when kids were beaten and hurt so much, or hurt in the warehouses, there was no medical care.
I mean, he didn't want that known.
We were always told to hide if there was somebody from the outside that came.
And he used to tell us that he would never lay a hand on us, which he actually did, slap and kick some of us, but he would say that he purposely didn't beat us because there was a lawsuit back in the 80s for one of the kids that was beaten severely, and he was never going to have it tied to him, and so that's why he had other people doing it.
Well, he hit me on 2 different occasions.
He hit and kicked me too.
Yeah, a lot of us.
Pathological liars, so.
But he didn't like leave bruises. Whenever it was the big heavy ones, it was the board. He didn't use boards on us.
How did it impact you to be hit by Tony directly?
For me, my first time was, I had just moved to his house, so I didn't know the whole routine and how things were. And I used to look at these comic books back home with my parents. And so I'm like, 11 years old here, and I'm just in the kitchen looking at these comic books. And I was with his other wives, and all of a sudden they got up really quick and tried to look busy, and I was wondering why they were doing this. And all of a sudden Tony comes walking through the door, all dressed in black and his glasses, just looking around. And I didn't think anything of it because I didn't know him on a deeper level at that time. And then he came over and he was like, "What are you looking at?" And I was like, "Oh, the comics." And I'm just all casual at the newspaper. And all of a sudden he's like, "Get this away from her." And like one of the sisters came over and took away the newspaper. And I was like, "What's going on?" And he came over and like kicked me And I was so confused because I had like looked up to this pastor for all my life until I moved into his house. Yeah, Papa Tony. And so he was saying, he was like telling me to go to the back of the house, and then he started talking about how the women from Fort Smith were fakes, etc. And so I stopped in the office to listen to him because I didn't want to be rude. And he just like came rushing through the door, and I just remember like my vision blurring up with black, and he like wrapped his arms around me and did some weird karate kick on me in front of everyone. And I didn't know what was going on. I was just like in shock. Like a few seconds ago, I thought this man was like all awesome, and then he's over here kicking me and doing this weird karate stuff on me. And he just like told me to go to the back of the room. And I just remember feeling so broken and so confused. I was like crying in the other room, and my sister Tamla, she had told me to go to the other room because if he heard me, he would come in to try to give me more. And then there was another time where I was sitting next to his daughter, and she started crying, and he had thought I did something to her, but I was just standing there in the kitchen, and he asked me to like pull out the chair, and I guess I didn't do it fast enough. He like hit me in the chest. It was just very confusing.
It was always out of nowhere. It was out of nowhere. It was random. You didn't expect it. Like,
he
it
could
was
be
just like,
smiling and do it.
he could be smiling. I mean, you just, it was so, you
Yeah.
never knew what was coming. That's why we were
Especially
terrified.
if your view of him was different, and then all of a sudden he starts hitting on you, and you're like, what is going on here?
An effect that I had when he did it to me was someone had reported me and Vanessa and Marcus's sister for saying something that was taken the wrong way, and Tony felt threatened by what we said, like we were trying to show him up in power or something, which was ridiculous, you know. But all these girls were there witnessing what someone said. Well, they said this and they meant this, and we were denying it. No, we didn't mean that, we didn't say that. And then he kicked me and he said, you said it, you tell me the truth. And then in that moment I thought, maybe I did say it, maybe it is true. Am I lying? And I started to doubt my own reality, because the pastor was doing this in front of everyone, and they all thought it was something else, and I was the only one who didn't. So suddenly I didn't know what was real anymore. So it definitely had that gaslighting effect.
Something that will help you all understand this even further is that Tony did not preach in the church. So the people that lived in the house were the ones that experienced him one-on-one. And as Alessandria said, she didn't really experience him personally until she went into the house. And to her, Papa Tony was this wonderful prophet who would embody everything you would think a kind person would embody, I think.
Also, at Christmas time, you know, our parents didn't have any money, and so any toys that were donated would go into the warehouses, and children would have to wrap the presents for different age groups, and they would be distributed, and they would all be from Papa Tony. None of them were from our parents, and so that was who we got he was our Santa, basically.
When you were moved into the house, were you aware of the grooming that was going on with Tony?
I remember when I first moved to Falk, I lived in the house next to Tony's, and one of my friends left me. She spent the night with my sister, and I remember her telling me in a quietest voice as she could that Tony was married to all these women. And I was like, you're joking. That is not real. He says all the time he doesn't have multiple wives, and she's like, no, seriously. So the very first time I went into Tony's home, I kind of looked at it very differently because someone had told me. And right away, Tony was very, he used to try to mistake me for other wives of his. So I was always like trying to hide behind something to get away from him. So I was always very aware that he had those wives.
Marcus, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, when I moved into his house, I was 7, and I chose to move there because he took my sister, who was 11, 4 hours across the state to marry her, and she was like my idol, and I loved her so much. And so I left my family, and I was like, can I come too? And he was like, yeah, come on. And so I was like, I chose to leave my family, which is crazy, and I moved in with them. But when I got there, I didn't know anybody except for my sister, and she was locked in his room for 4 days. And so I was 7 years old, and I didn't know any of these people, and so I kept asking, when's my sister gonna come out? When's she gonna come out? And they were like, don't ask that. And then when she finally did come out, she had a wedding ring on, and I just, with the fact that she was locked up with him for so long, in my mind, she was married. Like, I had no other way to explain it to myself as a 7-year-old, and I just quietly accepted that, and I didn't really ask questions because I could tell the tense and the tone of everything.
And how old was she?
She was 11.
Oh, at 11.
Marcus, did you and the other boys know what was going on in the house?
I had no idea. I mean, I heard about it in passing. I mean, because once my sisters lived with him, we didn't ever see them. But in small doses when we were exposed to each other. But I didn't understand the gravity of what was actually going on behind those doors.
Okay, thanks. Let's come to the day that you were taken, and deep breath, and come to the day you were taken. What did you believe about the adults out there, about us?
You were ready to just lead us into hell, damn our souls.
The enemy.
We knew that you were going to try to take away our beliefs and that we would have to stand strong against you.
So we were just like repeating like everything that like
Nonsense.
just preaching the Bible.
The Daniel on the lion's den was us. We actually read that passage together. We were like, all right, this is our chance. We're in the lion's den. We're in the fiery furnace, and we all kept each other strong.
And I
Never split
remember
us up.
when we first got put in foster care, Angela and me came in passing in the same DHS office, Department of Human Services, and everybody knows what that is. And Angela wrote like a secret note to me. Do you remember what that was? On a gum wrapper, because we were scared that they were watching us and like.
Well, because we weren't allowed to talk to each
And
other.
exactly, we weren't allowed to talk to each other. So like, I remember you wrote something, and I think it was pretty like religious, like something
It was
like.
probably just like, stay
Stay
strong,
strong.
we're gonna go back, or.
Yeah.
Something to just note about the system, this is sort of an editorial here. We know that DHS separated them because they wanted to find out what harm was being done, and they didn't want them to be a unit that would support each other to be quiet and not talk. But for them, they were taken from the only people they knew on Mars, essentially. And it didn't serve anyone well. I just need to say that. Let's come now to kind of 11 years later. How do you feel about the adults who are still in the cult right now?
Pretty apathetic on my part. I've given up on them because they don't want help, and I've learned that you really can't help people that don't want help. It's a waste of your time and energy.
It's like I believe we all have parents who are still in the cult. My dad's still in the cult and remarried 2 months after being with my mom for 18 years and having 5 children. He remarried within 2 months, and had another kid like within a few months after that. And he's still in the cult. Your dad's still in the cult. Your dad. And your
They
mom.
remarry them so they won't leave.
Exactly. So, and it's, yeah.
My mother actually left, and she got my dad to leave, but she found that there was no place for her out here. Nobody understood her. She didn't know how to make friends. She had spent from 18 to in her 60s there, all of her adult life. She had made all kinds of mistakes, given her daughter willfully. My dad didn't know, but she knew that she had given her daughter to be married. And when she came out here, she had no one, she couldn't face her problems, and there was no one to support her, so she went back. And then that ended her 38-year marriage of 7 children, and she was immediately remarried as well. So, every once in a while she emails me, but it's really lame, and it's about like the sorry state of the world, and while a lot of it is true, I just like choose to not just focus on that all the time, because I feel like it's more productive to focus on the good things and what I can do to make a difference. And it's just like really pathetic that the only relationship she knows how to have with me is in like bonding over negativity, and I just don't really respond back to her anymore.
To the question, I feel pity for them. They're pathetic humans. They really are. And there's no amount of information that you could give them that would make them understand the pathetic life that they've chosen for themselves. I pity them, but also I sort of hope that they rot there, because there are laws that prevent me from murdering all of them. So them being unhappy in any sort of way is solace for me. I can't make them suffer, but they can suffer. I spent so much time physically afraid that when I came out of the cult, I focused on becoming physically strong so that I could protect myself. Right? I joined the military, I exercised, and now that I'm just bigger, I don't feel threatened by them anymore. I feel pity.
I think the longer that I'm gone, I truly understand the gravity of what was done, and I just cannot believe that someone with an experience in the outside world would treat other humans that way. And it makes me angry that they will never take responsibility or understand what they've done. And I don't think that's fair.
Is that true of all of them? That they're not taking responsibility for what they did?
There's been some who have an attempt, but I feel like half of the time it's them crying, trying to make me feel sorry for them. And I don't feel sorry for them.
Either way, even if they came out with the best intentions and they genuinely felt remorse for what they've done, I would dare to say that it's too little too late. You've done too much. You've broken too many people, including yourself. The fact of the matter is they are responsible for what they did. And they don't get any empathy from me.
I will say here that after writing the book, after we wrote this book, their parents' age people attacked me in the book and said, "You wrote about the kids, you should write about us. The kids have a lot of money. Who asked you to write this book? Was it those foster families?" You know, and I think what's happened is, for many of them, and these are the ones that are out now, but they're so broken, and they haven't gotten help. They've just kind of come out and barely survived, and not thought about anything anymore. They don't have contact with their families. And I think the book is in their faces. I think it's, you know, and these young people are here now speaking. And so what they did is right in their faces. And they need to deal with the shame, the embarrassment, the guilt, the grief of the things, the spirits that they have killed in their lives. And most of them that I have talked with don't get counseling. They don't know what to do. They think they're going to be okay, and they're not. So that's just sort of an aside of what I've seen. And I think what I want to ask next is, when you go to dinner, like let's say you go to a pub here, and you see a table with a mom and a dad and maybe 2 children, a baby and a younger child, what do you think as you look at them?
To me, it's a good feeling. I have at certain points in my life felt a little bit of loss and jealousy at seeing children be able to be children. But I don't want to take it from them. It's just, it puts it in my face that I didn't get to have that, and that I never will, you know. But it also serves as a reminder, as I am a mother, that I can create something different for my child. And I can offer, you know, basically all the things that I needed, you know, that every child needs.
And so having a son and watching him grow, how does it impact you in terms of thinking about your childhood compared to his?
I'm very happy that he gets to, you know, have a regular life and a life where I can encourage his natural talents. I'm glad that at this point, he's almost 8 years old, and I feel like I'm past all that. We have other challenges to deal with, but I don't know. I'm thankful, and he actually teaches me things, and he sees things in me where I struggle, and he's like, he'll remind me, like even when it's things like, Mom, like you're on your phone right now and I'm trying to spend time with you, like he'll tell me to get off my phone and spend time with him, and I thank him. I say thank you because I get distracted, and and so I tell him that we help each other and we're a team, and that's where I've talked to him about his attitude, and just I have clear communication with him. Maybe sometimes I'm a little too adult with him, but it's just a balance that has to be figured out.
How about the rest of you looking at that family? What comes to mind?
I feel that the child is so lucky. Like sometimes I'll just look and like smile, not to like look weird or anything, but I'm just like, wow, it's such, it's something to see, especially like if the family's like really nice and nurturing to the kid, and it's just like, I guess like in the Disney world for me sometimes I'm just like, really, I just feel like the child's very lucky, and the whole family.
It makes you wonder what you would have accomplished by now if you had been given that support.
I feel a probably not rational protective sense for those kids, because the prettiest, most prim and proper Christian family has skeletons in the closet. I promise they do. Every human being is capable of being a shitty person. And at some point in that child's life, the father and or mother figures that have all the power, because the person that's teaching the child how to be a person has abused that power. And I don't always see it in public. I don't see physical abuse in public, but that's one of those things. It makes me edgy. Because I've been in places where parents were threatening their children, and getting upset, I have two choices. I can physically subdue the father, or I can just leave. I agree with the girls that in some way those kids with a regular family have it better. But I don't envy that necessarily, because I don't think that those kids will ever have the survival instincts that I do, because they haven't walked the path that I have. Not that I wish that on them, but I admire that strength about myself, and so I don't necessarily envy them. I don't want to have their life. I just don't want the power over them to be abused.
Sounds like children are triggering for you.
A little bit. I spent years of my life as a child having to physically protect my younger brother, and I was young enough at the time that I was still learning how to be a human, how to be a person, how to interact with this reality. And I think that some of those instincts are just innate now. That's what I was taught when I was forming, when my brain was literally growing. That's what I was doing, and that maybe some of those instincts are in overdrive. But I think that's a good thing.
You bring up something so important, how in this group and many other groups, it's up to the siblings to parent their younger sisters and brothers, because there's such a vacuum with the parents.
I'd like to note as well, being that I sort of did have to father my younger brother, not once in the span of years that I was there, that when I was responsible for him, did I ever strike him? Did I ever put my hands on him at all? And that's what that's what the men were doing. That's what we were taught. This is how you educate. And it was never something that even in the deepest setting of that cold mindset, I never once took it upon myself to physically abuse my younger brother. Which is why I have no patience for that, because when people blame treating younger people, treating their children badly, they're like, well, I had a bad childhood. I went through trauma, and this is how I'm not coping well. I promise I have enough trauma to go around. And not once have I ever made a decision to hurt someone else.
Yeah, it's a choice. It's definitely a choice.
Do you have anything to add on this one? Seeing the family?
People think it like stands out to me, and like, I guess I don't really notice it. I mean, sometimes I think what could have been, but I think since my time there, I've had a very loving and wonderful adoptive family. And in that way, I feel very whole. I'm not particularly fond of children. I think they're cute, but I don't really know how to I like dogs. I do know that if I ever did have a kid, which I'm not planning on it, but if I ever did, I would love it and protect it, and it would be everything.
Mm-hmm.
But children are very childlike.
Something you never got to be. Right. Can't relate.
But they are precious and wonderful and should be protected. I believe that.
I just feel the same way Angela does. Like, it's like you were jealous of that a little bit of what could have been, but it's also nice to see. Yeah, I feel the same way she feels.
How do you decide that an adult out here, or even a peer, but I think as we look at the generations, how do you decide that we're trustworthy? How do you find someone and know that you can trust them? Or do you?
Most of the time I don't. And trust is it's a fickle thing. For me, it's about measuring it's about calculating what you can take from me and how you can hurt me. It's not that complicated. It's a simple matter of how much. Yeah, exactly. Risk versus reward. For someone that I care about deeply, that person can hurt me, right? Because emotionally I'm close to them. I keep that circle small because it makes me feel secure. There are fewer people that can do emotional damage to me. And for those that, I keep most people at arm's length, just because no matter who you trust, no matter how trustworthy they are, they're going to fail you. They're going to hurt you at some point, whether they're trying to or not. So I just don't give them access. Don't give them access to that part of me. Just because I've spent enough time upset and emotional hurt, and so I just protect that part of myself. I can have a human interaction without giving you access, giving you the opportunity to hurt me.
I feel like before I ever even have before I calculate whether or not I should trust them, there's not very many people that get that far because a lot of people lack the depth that I need to let them in that far to begin with. So there's that.
Yeah. So it's hard to have long-term connected relationships.
A lot of people, I don't know, I need to be stimulated in a lot of ways. And they just usually only offer one or two. And if they're like that, then I don't value their relationship enough to keep them as someone that I trust deeply. Like I respect them as humans and we have our interaction, but then we move on.
For me, I've gone through periods where I didn't trust at all, and then I trusted a little bit too much. Because, it's like, oh, people, they say all kinds of stuff that sounds really, really good. But now I'm just like, show me like the action, like you can say all the words you want to, like go to these guys and say all this stuff. Oh, you're this and you're that, la la la. Or I'm this and that, and I'm like, okay, sure, you're saying all this, and I'm like, we'll see, Now I'm all about the actions, like the proof. So I'm at that period in my life, so.
It's always been about intuition for me. It's just a gut feeling, and it's never led me wrong. But I also don't put up. I know who I am, and I know what I'm not. And I don't put up with anything that doesn't fit within that. So I think sometimes I may not, something that I struggle with is maybe maintaining relationships that to me, I want to write off because they're doing small things that doesn't fit my view, I guess. So I guess now I'm kind of trying to learn how to maintain relationships despite people not being in the same place as me or maybe not being, I've seen people who haven't been through severe trauma and they have loads of issues. And so it's about accepting people for where they're at. And even though people maybe act out sometimes, that they're hurt and you're not trying to hurt you. So I just learned to maintain relationships and not cut people off, because I was always just very quick to like, I don't need anybody, I'm self-sufficient. So there is benefits to letting people in your life and giving them that foot in the door to become something to you, and it's beneficial to you and them, and people need that.
What's the benefit?
I started going to therapy a while ago, and I was like, I just feel like everybody needs me more than I need them. And it was so irritating. Everybody felt so needy. They wanted to spend time with me. They wanted to do things with me. I'm an introvert and I love to be alone, but I feel the most stable that I have in my entire life, and that's thanks to really great people who I just spend time with and allow into my life. Obviously, these are people that are meant to be there and they're not hurting me because my intuition has not led me wrong, but we're meant to connect with people. We're meant to have relationships, and it just really gives you a sense of security and, happiness. And you can't make it through life alone. And so you have to have people.
Shane?
I've struggled with trust issues, still to this day, but I kind of feel the same way that Vanessa says. I feel like I have an intuition, and I feel like I can read people really well. I feel like I can. But as I've gotten older, I've learned to trust a little more. It's better to be a little more trusting than to not be trusting at all. So I'm still learning to kind of be open, but I still struggle with trust issues to this day, so that's hard.
Having been a mother of a toddler myself, I know what a challenge those years are for any mother, and especially a mother without support, without any frame of reference of a good role model. It was just you, everything on you, and you struggled with it, which so many people don't do. And that's to be applauded, that you really struggled with it and you tried to find a way out of it. So it's so understandable. I think it's probably understandable, particularly for people who've had children in this room.
Nobody who's a parent cannot identify with what you described. None of us that are parents.
We were taught to say, do not spirit the rod. And everyone can look back and say, wow, I would have done things, I wish I could have done things differently.
Absolutely.
I want to just comment on the issue of choice, because I think that's really crucial. I think it's important. Come to Manchester and I need to get from point A to point B, and I look around and I go, okay, there's a bus, there's a tram. I don't see any taxis, so as far as I know, I can't choose a taxi, even if the taxis exist, right? So there's a person who's been very involved who has been involved in working with former cultists and is one herself, Yanya Lalich, who published a book called Bounded Choice, which I think is a very, very good theory to explain how, on the one hand, there is free will in a cult, but instead of having choices like here, your choices are here. Your choices, so you don't have the choice in raising a child, for example. You don't have the choice of bringing your child to a behavioral specialist or to a pediatrician, or to your choices are hit or not hit. And those are your two choices. So in a sense, you do have a choice, but the choices are very, very circumscribed. They're very bounded. I think that's just an important point that I'd like to make to people who I work with a lot, who come in and feel horrible shame and guilt because of the quote-unquote choices that they made. And I'd like to remember, yes, it was a choice, but it was a bounded choice. Okay? So I want to make that comment. The second thing I wanted to ask if you would speak to how it was when most of you, when you came out, you went to public school, and of course I've read your accounts of what it was like being in public school, both in the book and in your testimonies. So if you could speak to what it was like to come from that environment into a public school environment as a teenager.
felt like I'd been dropped on a different planet. I'll never forget sitting in my fine arts class looking at this. We were just filling, it was like a short answer with some instruments. I had no idea what they were. And it was, I just felt so stupid. And, you know, someone asked me about Beyonce. I was like, what's a Beyonce? You know, I don't know what that is. And it was just, I was really flustered and irritated by all the children at the school. They did not raise their hands. They were not nice to the teachers. I cursed. Very foul-mouthed fellas, and they would then want to be my friend, and I was like, that's really embarrassing. No. It was really tough. I mean, just not having any cultural or social references for anything. I just remember sitting in my seat trying so hard not to shake because I was so scared of everything. But it got better. I read a lot of books, watched a lot of TV shows. The Disney Channel helped me a lot. Loved it.
Not only that, but like as far as education goes, we were above the most of the children's level when it comes to spelling and grammar and English and, you know, reading and writing. But when it came to math and science, we were severely deficient, and it made us feel inadequate and all that. And we had to, you know, while I could have tested out of all of the English lessons, I chose to do 2 of them because I wanted to. But I had to start from the beginning in math, you know, from like 9th grade math. Not all of it, but the algebra specifically.
So we were taking like 9th grade. My freshman year, I was taking 9th grade and senior level courses. So I was in all these different age groups with also no ability to be social at all. So it's very tough.
We just spent a lot of time in the library.
Oh, I was just going to say it was tough because we were never around any males in our whole lives, you know, and so coming into a public school and like being in classrooms with boys, I mean, it was so like, I was nervous, I was angry, I was still in my head like so cult-minded, you know, and I remember bringing my Bible and like at lunchtime, like sitting on the stairs, and of course didn't have my Bible, and like people were coming up to me and trying to like be friends, like you're the new girl, and you know, I had some guy, you know, some cute boys walking up to me and trying to get to know the new girl, and I'm over here like quoting Bible scripture and stuff. It was a lot to take in. I think the big thing was being in the same room and having male teachers and male, you know, boys in the classroom. That was like really big for me.
You all actually were taught not to look men in the eye, correct?
Yeah, my adoptive dad would talk all the time how when he first came home, I wouldn't look at him. I would just, you know, I still struggle with male bosses at work.
If you made eye contact, they might start asking to marry you.
So.
How was it with you and the girls?
Well, the first thing that came to mind is what Shayna said. I was walking around the 7th grade in a pretty big public school with a full-size King James Version Bible. And at lunch, sat by myself and read Old English. People thought I was weird, and admittedly I was a little weird. Same thing, was taught not to even look at women. It was considered sin. Like, fornication was looking at someone. It was a weird mindset, but I was overstimulated. There was way too much going on at one time. That's why I like hid in my Bible. But again, being the new kid, everybody wanted to come talk to me. And luckily I'm adaptable. We did okay. Learning how to socialize with like both genders. As far as academics goes, I wasn't pulled out of school when they were in the cult. I was extremely proficient in math. I got a much more well-rounded education because the needs of the cult required me to know more of that. My dad, a lot of the time that he was away, he was reframing and refurbishing old houses that Tony would flip and sell, and knowing geometry and algebra, those are things that I would need to know if I was going to do that, so they kept me in those courses. So when I walked into 7th grade, I tested out above my peers, but that was because I needed to know those to serve Tony's wants.
Yes.
First off, thank you very much for your grace and composure
which must have been incredibly difficult to get to where you can do that and speak about this. Thank you. Many of you know, I'm middle generation of 3-generation cults, so many overlapping. I specifically want to bring up for future discussion perhaps a point that Marcus made that has been my observation and probably blasphemy to much of the cult studies world. While I acknowledge that many first generation are victims, and those are the people that are studied and written about and receive help through ICSA. Like Marcus brought up, my experience with many of the first generation are there by choice. They are, who are still in the group, and that would include my parents, my father who had a recent terrible death, my mother who I choose to keep safe. They are using the dogma, the belief system, the group, to be narcissistic sadists.
Yep.
There are others who are victims there, without a doubt. But there are some, and those are the people who will never be studied, right? Because they have to leave to get mainstream help. Or they, like my ex-husband, leave and form their own cult, and then they're doing it, right? And I really appreciate that you brought up that point, and I think it is a very important point, no different than some of the leaders in, the only time I've seen this written about is about some of the leaders or sub-leaders in the Nazi death camps, okay, who were choosing that role under that regime.
I think it's funny that you mentioned that you said it was your ex-husband.
Well, it's my parents, my ex, I mean, it's.
Right, well, that he went and formed his own cult. As we mentioned before, Tony Alomo died in prison, it was, almost 2 years ago now. And of the 4 people leading the cult now, one of them is my biological father. I'm not. I wish him misery. Like, he's that is a system that's, right? It's a
forgiveness thing, but the reality is.
Pardon my French, fuck forgiveness, okay? I'm sorry, but until you've coughed up your own blood, don't talk to me about forgiveness. It's coming from a different place. I like the way that you articulated that they use the parameters and the cult environment as, while Tony Alomo had the ultimate authority, a lot of it was unsupervised. A lot of what they did, there weren't cameras, there weren't people watching in our house, in my bedroom. And a lot of what I know my father to be is a sadist. He enjoyed it, he liked hurting us.
Right, and that's aside from what they're told to do.
Exactly, that wasn't part of the doctrine. You said spare the rod and you know, rod the child. It's in the Bible. They take it and they run with it. And that's not everyone, obviously, but in my personal experience and in your experience, we suffered at the hands of people that are demented. And I think it comes off a little gauche, you know, when I say that people that are there are shitty humans, because not some of them were victims, but in my personal experience, much like yours, and I think it's a lot more commonplace, is that they enjoy making other people
So
suffer.
perpetrators find a way to do what they want to do and not get caught.
Absolutely.
You live in a place where you don't have to ever make money, and you have no financial or fiscal responsibility. You can do whatever the fuck you want. And they completely capitalize on that.
There were different types of parents. I think that Angie's father struggled with his role more. Your father struggled less, if at all. You know, but your father, it wasn't his temperament, and he had to be stricter, or he was shamed more for his behavior.
I want to talk to that too. Again, I'm pretty angry, I think that's obvious, about all of this. I'm still, I'm angry all the time. I eat angry, I drink angry, I shit angry. But whether you are an alpha male, a dominator, and you physically hurt other people, or whether you don't have the spine to stand up to that person, or to run away from them, or to bring your children away from them, either role, you're still the walls, you're still the fabric of that community. And being a part of it, your heart beating, standing there, is still wrong. And whatever form that takes, whether it's strength or whether it's weakness, it shouldn't have happened. And either way, you're still accountable, because those are still your actions. You still stood there. Whether you were pathetic and hiding, or whether you were beating your chest, you were still there. You still made the choice. You have feet, you could have walked away. And again, I like it. You have like a limited amount of choices. I like the way you articulated that. It was an intriguing idea, yes. I think our choices were a lot more bound, because we literally were born there. Those people they lived in California. Like they literally experienced I would say, dare to say, the like highest level of freedom, because they walked around and smoked pot as hippies and like did what they wanted. You know, they literally experienced the outside world. They weren't born into this. They knew so much more about this actual reality, and they chose to make the wall be the fabric of that community.
Just since moving on from there, and we do all have choices, I choose to forgive, because I feel like that releases me of that anger, and it releases me of what they did to me, and I'm not holding that poison inside of me anymore, and it's not growing inside of me. And I do have anger towards other things that have happened since then that were a result of it, and I'm working through them. But I think that a lot of us have chosen forgiveness, and that's okay that you're not, and but I just wanted to bring up that perspective that I think that forgiveness is key, for me personally, and I'm about now just like moving forward and healing through art and releasing and finding what it is that I am good at, and what are those like unique things about me, and nurturing those. And I'm dancing, and I do aerial silks, I climb, and I do all this stuff, because to me, like, that's just one way of just transforming and making it into something beautiful, and so on.
You are all individuals. You are unique individuals. You see and process things in your own way, and that's fine.
Yeah, I think we aspire to be different people, and that's okay. I mean, all respect to your coping mechanisms. Me personally, I wanted to morph into someone that couldn't physically be dominated anymore. I will literally, I would do anything to protect myself and other people.
I do want to say really quick about forgiveness and anger. I'm embracing both. While you can forgive, it's important not to condone the behavior and let them believe that it was okay that this happened. I lost my baby brother 3 weeks ago, Wednesday. As a result, we grew up in the cult, born and raised in the cult, as a result of neglect. And that definitely put more of a fire and anger in me, I would say. Like, I have forgiveness and anger in me, like Marcus has, but this anger, I'm directing it to how can I do something about the situation. People, kids, adults coming from these cults and environments that don't know anything of the world, and some of them have more challenges than others. And then me being the older sister, 1 year older, having that role model of like the parent in a way, and so feeling the obligation that you want to help, you want to give more, but you have to help yourself more in order to help others. And so I was like, okay, how can I add more value to others so I can receive more value in return, and then like help fill up other people's cups, like my family around me. And so I had this whole plan for my brother, and then like I'm in the process of like getting out my story in a creative way, as much as I can now. I'm just like, after that happened, I was like, I have no time to be shy. I don't have the privilege to be shy or timid anymore. I have to like be out there, share my story in a positive light, add value to others, and help people. So I'm like really fired up and have like the anger that Marcus has now, because it really freaking pissed me off. Because I had a plan for my brother. I was like, I know, we're going over, but it's very,
I'm responding to the motion, though.
I'm just, I was going to set him up in this place, have someone be there to help mentor him because, he's struggling in some areas. A lot of us, it doesn't just stop at the cult, obviously, because we come into the outside world and we're like learning, trying to figure out how to function. And, I joined the military. I joined the Army. I was in there for a few years. I got married, I got divorced, and so did Marcus. And so we had our own challenges there, like bringing up the past and thinking that we could deal with it, but really it was just bringing up more PTSD and another culture shock. And so there's all these different layers that we all have experienced that we're like moving forward. And there's like plenty of times, I know, between all of us that we could have just given up and been like, I'm tired, I want to exit this world. Like, so many times, but then when you make that choice that no, you have to keep going forward, and this is just another obstacle that you could overcome to be more of an impact to others and help others. And I'm sure you all get this too, but I get people who tell me that they don't necessarily believe that I've gone through so much craziness and insanity in my life because I seem so put together. But I'm just like, well, that's just a testimony that, yes, let me show you this book, my pictures, my art in this book, let me tell you these stories. And so I'm having to like show more proof, as funny as it is now, that I've been through all this crazy stuff, and that's more of a testament for all of us that when you make a choice, you can push through as hard as it can be. It's a choice in that area just to keep on going. I mean, you could become like crazy.
So what is your relationship like today? The survivors, the group, you all went through this, you saw each other and everything. So what is your relationship today with each other?
We see each other as, we're always like sisters, cousins, whatever you want to call it. We're very, very close.
We don't see each other all the time and hang out all the time, but when we do, it's always just like
instant.
Yeah.
Okay.
Debbie, would you said that the group is active in New York City now. Would you just expand on that a bit about what's happening to...
Yes, thank you. In New York City in particular, and this is happening in other parts of the country as well, the tracts, which are our flyers that you all printed and folded and distributed, end up on car windshields. They're all over the place in New York. A docuseries was created by Sundance and Peacock Studios, NBC, and New York became a target because of NBC being involved. And that particular producer's, the school where her children go, regularly would get flyers on the cars parked in that parking lot. They're out by the subway, they're out on the streets, and they have a restaurant in Manhattan, and they invite, this is sort of the Alomo MO, it's a regular restaurant, they own it, they run it, they cook, they don't get money, of course, they're the enslaved labor, and people come in and pay for their meals, but they also invite people in to eat, and then they go to the second floor for a service. And this is how they build their group. There are 4 people that we know of right now who are running it. And it's very much active in many corners and states in this country. And I'm going everywhere there are Alomo people to let them know we know they're there. And it's our intention to educate people about these cults that are not behind fences wearing pastel dresses. And I don't mean to put that down, that's there too. But they look just or better than we do. And can blend very well, and they are in our neighborhoods. The fellowship, the foundation book, which is like a yearbook, has on the front, with pictures that were staged of everybody having fun and working as a committee to build the church and so on. On the front it says, we're your neighbors. And they are. And we need to start doing something about that. And I do want to tell you, the book is sort of our first step. And the money that we earn, I speak to groups and get speakers fees and from the book earnings. We're setting up a foundation to help cult survivors. Part of that will be to educate the communities at a grassroots level, people that work in areas where I will say survivors and now thrivers are. And these individuals, as you can see, are invested in doing what we're doing. They're incredibly brave.
Yes.
But we are going to continue to shout at a very loud voice about this. And honestly, I met these folks in 2014 and we wrote a book. And I'm so grateful that you trusted me with your story and that you now are willing to trust strangers. This is a safe place, but I can tell you that we go to workshops that ISCA sponsors for practitioners and communities, and participants are held spellbound by what they learn from you, and I am too. I'm really grateful to you all. And Kenny, did you have?
Oh, one quick question. First of all, I admire all of you as a group with a common background, and as individuals, you're so articulate, so it's very interesting and inspiring to hear all of you. I have a quick question, if anybody has any memory of two things that came up in the talk, and I'm thinking of the title of your book, in terms of the aspect, just the perspective. Going way back when you talked about like an outsider would come in and then you would behave even differently, and to fear them, and was there ever curiosity, were they, the evil and bad, or was there ever curiosity or admiration to the outside world, or were you so closed in? And that's one question. And the follow-up was when you mentioned that you were with the FBI and separated, and these people you were praying for. When did it open up to go, oh, wait a second, maybe there is some good here, or there was daylight? So those two questions, if anybody has any memory to reflect on.
I was very interested in moving from the Arkansas branch to the LA branch because it seemed a lot cooler and you can go out and see new people, and like there was a little bit of the outside world, and I always wanted more input because I need more stimulation. But so I don't know, that's what I can say.
I feel like growing up as girls, obviously the boys, we weren't able to be around the boys, but as girls we were always very curious and very imaginative and very, any chance, I remember standing in Sam's Club watching Star Wars, which to this day is my favorite movie, but it just seemed like this bit, like part of me I think always knew that this wasn't the way it was supposed to be. I'll never forget the first time I saw Tony without his toupee and sunglasses on. I was like, he looks rough. And I really thought to myself, because he basically told us that he was like God, and I was like, that doesn't look like what I think God looks like. He doesn't act what I think God acts like, and I think I always remember us talking as young girls wanting to go to school and see movies, and so we were very curious. And always, like, my sister and I were always getting in trouble because we would find radios and we would steal CDs from stores and lip gloss and all those things we weren't supposed to do, passing notes to boys. I think we were always really curious. So I feel like the second I knew I was safe after we were taken and I realized they weren't going to make me go back, I was like, okay, I'm all in. I was ready to leave it all behind.
I think a lot of the kids didn't really talk, though, until he was sentenced and put behind bars. Is that correct?
Yeah, it took me like 3 months, I would say, like after I was taken and put into foster care to kind of come to the reality of like, wow, I was in a cult and none of this is real, like there's a whole outside world.
I think just having that exposure without the supervision of former cult members was kind of beneficial. To see the light.
We have been summoned to end. Thank you so much.